You ever have one of those moments where the world just pulls the rug out from under you? For me, that wasn't a stranger or a bad boss. It was my own flesh and blood. They left me high and dry when I was at my lowest, thinking they'd buried me for good. But what they didn't know is they weren't burying me. They were planting a seed, and what grew back was their worst nightmare. Before the fall, my life was good. It was simple, but it was mine. I'd built a small but respected graphic design studio from nothing, just a laptop on a secondhand desk in my spare bedroom, which slowly grew into a sleek little office downtown with 3 employees and a client list that made me proud. It wasn't a Fortune 500 company, but it was a testament to 16-hour days and a belief in my own 2 hands. My life was my work, but my heart was my family. We were the kind of family you see in commercials. Sunday dinners at Aunt Carol's were a religious experience. The smell of her pot roast filled the house, a scent I associated with safety, with belonging. My cousins, Mark and Jenny, and I were more like siblings. We'd spent summers building forts in the woods behind our grandparents' house, the same house I now owned, the same house where we marked our heights on the kitchen door frame year after year. Uncle Ben, quiet and steady, was the one I went to for practical advice. They were my people, my anchor. I was the one they called when they needed a last-minute loan for a car repair or someone to co-sign on an apartment. I never hesitated. I would have given any one of them the shirt off my back, and I lived with the comforting, naive certainty that they would do the same for me. I believed our bond was forged in something stronger than convenience. I thought it was forged in love. I had no idea it was actually made of glass, just waiting for the slightest pressure to shatter. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. It was an email from my biggest client, a tech startup that accounted for nearly 40% of my revenue. The subject line was just 2 words: company update. Inside was a sterile corporate-speak memo announcing they were ceasing all operations, effective immediately. Bankruptcy. Just like that. A pillar of my business had turned to dust. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine, but I told myself it was manageable. I'd hustle. I'd find new clients. I was a fighter. 2 days later, the second crack appeared. The specialized software suite my entire team relied on, the digital backbone of our whole operation, was acquired by a competitor. They weren't just raising the price. They were discontinuing the platform entirely in a month. All of our project files, years of work, would become inaccessible. Migrating everything would cost a fortune I didn't have, and take time I couldn't spare. It was like the universe was playing a cruel joke, systematically dismantling everything I'd built, piece after agonizing piece. Suddenly, my business wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. New clients were hesitant to sign on with a firm in such a volatile position. I funneled all my personal savings into making payroll, trying to keep my team's spirits up while my own were sinking into a black abyss. I sold my car, I maxed out my credit cards, I stopped sleeping. The nights were the worst, spent staring at the ceiling, the numbers swirling in my head like vultures. Then came the letters. First, polite reminders, then angry red stamps, past due, final notice. The foreclosure notice on my grandparents' house felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. The call started, faceless voices from collections agencies, their tones ranging from feigned sympathy to outright hostility. I was at the end of my rope, frayed and unraveling. There was only one option left, the one I'd been avoiding, the one that felt like a monumental failure. I had to ask for help. I had to call my family. Swallowing a lump of pride so large it almost choked me, I called Aunt Carol. My voice was shaky, but I tried to keep it steady. I asked if we could have a family meeting at her house. I needed to talk to everyone. She agreed, her voice dripping with the syrupy sweetness I used to find so comforting. Now it just sounded ominous. Driving to her house that Sunday felt like the longest drive of my life. Every landmark on the way, the park where we had picnics, the corner store where we bought candy, was a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. I parked on the street, took a deep breath, and walked up the familiar stone path. I felt small, like a child about to confess to breaking a window. I was walking into that living room, hat in hand, looking at the faces of the people I trusted most in the entire world. Aunt Carol opened the door before I could knock, a wide, practiced smile on her face. She led me into the living room where Mark and Uncle Ben were already waiting. She handed me a tall glass of sweet tea, the condensation cold against my trembling fingers. She patted my arm, her touch feeling less like comfort and more like acclaim. "Now," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "tell us everything." I took a sip of the tea, the sweetness cloying in my throat. I had no idea I was a lamb walking to the slaughter. I laid it all out on Aunt Carol's polished coffee table. The client, the software, the savings account that now contained nothing but dust and regret. I explained the foreclosure notice, the relentless calls from creditors. My voice cracked once or twice, but I pushed through. My hands clasped so tightly, my knuckles were white. I wasn't asking for a handout. I made that clear. I had a plan. I just needed a bridge. A short-term loan to cover the migration to a new system and keep the lights on for 3 months while I rebuilt my client base. I even had a repayment schedule drafted. It wasn't a sob story. I looked up, expecting to see concern, maybe a bit of sympathy. Instead, I was met with a wall of cold, calculated silence. The shift was palpable. It was like a cold front had rolled into the room, sucking all the warmth out of the air. Aunt Carol's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, thin line. She set her glass down on a coaster with a decisive click. "Well," she began, her voice sharp, "I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so." She looked at Mark, then back at me. "This is what happens when you build your life on something so risky. A real job with a pension, that's security. You were always chasing a fantasy." Cousin Mark, who I'd helped get out of 3 different financial jams without a single lecture, leaned back in his armchair, a smug look on his face. "She's right," he chimed in, his tone dripping with condescension. "You were always flying too close to the sun, showing off with that fancy office downtown. Some of us have to be more responsible." It wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. My desperate plea for help had morphed into an intervention, and I was the addict whose life choices were being dissected by a panel of self-righteous judges. They spoke about me as if I wasn't even there, listing my mistakes, my arrogance, my failure to listen to their sound advice they'd never actually given. Uncle Ben just stared at his worn leather shoes, tracing the seams with his eyes. He wouldn't look at me. His silence was the most damning indictment of all. He was a coward, and in that moment, I hated him for it more than I hated the others for their cruelty. Then came the final, brutal blow. After they had finished tearing me down, stripping away the last vestiges of my dignity, Aunt Carol leaned forward, her expression softening into a grotesque mask of pity. "Look," she said, her voice now syrupy again, "we want to help. We do. We're family." She glanced at Mark, a flicker of something passing between them. "We can't give you a loan. Throwing good money after bad, you know. But we've talked it over, and we have a solution." She paused for dramatic effect. "We'll buy the house from you." The room spun. My house. My grandparents' house. The only real thing I had left. "We'll take over the mortgage," she continued, "and give you a little extra on top, enough to get you a small apartment for a few months. It'll be a clean break. You can start fresh, without all this baggage." I knew what the house was worth, even in a quick sale. I also knew what I owed. The little extra she was talking about wouldn't be a lifeline. It would be pocket change. They weren't offering to save me. They were vultures, circling what they thought was a carcass, ready to pick my bones clean. They saw my rock bottom not as a tragedy, but as a business opportunity. They wanted to profit from my failure, to own the last piece of my history and call it generosity. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. The grief and panic I'd been drowning in for weeks solidified into a single, sharp point of anger. I looked past Mark's smirk, past Uncle Ben's downcast eyes, and locked my gaze directly onto Aunt Carol. I saw her for what she was. Not my loving aunt, not my safety net, but a predator who had been waiting for me to show a moment of weakness. I set my untouched glass of sweet tea on the table. The sound was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the hostile silence. "No," I said. My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. Absolutely not. Aunt Carol's mask of concern dropped instantly. She scoffed, a short, ugly sound of disbelief. "Don't be a fool," she hissed. "It's this or the street. What other choice do you have?" "I'll take the street," I said, standing up. My legs felt stronger than they had in months. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Fine," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "But don't come crawling back here when you're on the street. Beggars can't be choosers." I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked out the front door, leaving them sitting there in their smug, suffocating living room. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me. The sound didn't just echo on the quiet suburban street. It echoed in the hollowed-out space where my heart used to be. For the first time in my life, I was well and truly, utterly alone. The street it was. The bank moved faster than I thought possible. Within 2 weeks, there was an official-looking notice taped to my front door, and the locks were changed. I packed what I could fit into my old Honda Civic, a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop, a box of photo albums I couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else, the furniture my grandfather had built, the books I'd collected since I was a teenager, the life I had so carefully curated, was gone. Just another casualty of the wreckage. The first night in my car was the worst. I parked in the far corner of a 24-hour grocery store lot, trying to be invisible. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, but the gear shift dug into my hip, and the steering wheel pressed against my knees. Sleep didn't come. I just listened to the hum of the parking lot lights and the sound of my own breathing, shallow and ragged. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I'd wash up in gas station bathrooms, my reflection in the cracked, grimy mirrors, a stranger I didn't recognize. Sunken eyes, matted hair, a haunted look that seemed permanently etched onto my face. I sold my grandmother's locket, the one she wore on her wedding day, to a pawn shop for $40. I used it to buy gas and a week's worth of cheap granola bars and instant noodles that I'd cook with hot water from a coffee machine dispenser. I had hit a bottom so deep I couldn't even see the light anymore. Just when the despair was about to swallow me whole, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize at first, but the message was a lifeline. It was from Sarah, a friend from college I hadn't seen in years. We'd lost touch, as people do, but we'd always had an easy, honest connection. The text read, "Hey, just heard through the grapevine about what's going on. Don't know the details, don't need to, but my spare room couch is empty and I make a mean lasagna. No questions asked. My address is." Tears streamed down my face, hot and messy. It wasn't pity, it was a simple, straightforward offer of help. It was everything my family wasn't. I drove to her apartment, feeling like a refugee seeking asylum. When she opened the door, she didn't give me a look of sorrow. She just pulled me into a hug, held on tight for a long minute, and then said, "Shower's on the left. Lasagna will be ready in an hour." Staying with Sarah was like coming up for air after being held underwater. She never once made me feel like a burden. She'd leave for work in the morning, and I'd spend my days on her couch with my laptop, firing off applications for any remote design work I could find.
The rejections stung, but for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of agency, a tiny spark in the suffocating darkness. Her garage was cluttered with old furniture and forgotten hobbies, but to me, it was a sanctuary. I cleared a small corner, set up a folding table, and started a tiny side hustle. I used my old skills for small local jobs, designing a menu for the pizza place down the street for $50, creating a logo for a dog walker for $100. It was grueling, thankless work, a humiliating fall from the bespoke branding packages I used to sell for thousands. But every dollar was a victory. Every completed project was a small act of defiance. It was the first wobbly rung on a ladder I was building myself, out of the hell my family had left me in. One afternoon, I was working on a set of flyers for a local bakery when a man walked into the garage. He was older, with calloused hands and a no-nonsense look in his eye. He introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, the owner of a small chain of local hardware stores. He'd seen the flyers I'd made for the bakery. He liked the clean lines, the simple, effective design. He walked around my tiny, makeshift workspace, looking at the other small projects I had pinned to a corkboard. He didn't say much, just grunted in a way that I couldn't tell was approval or disgust. Then he turned to me. "I'm rebranding my entire business," he said, his voice a low grumble. "All 5 of my stores. New logo, new signage, new website, the whole damn thing. I got a quote from a big agency in the city. They want a king's ransom." He looked me dead in the eye. "I'll give you the project, but I need it done in 4 months, and my budget is half of what they quoted." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was an impossible task. It was a project that my old studio, with its team of 3, would have struggled to complete in that time frame. For me, alone in a dusty garage with a second-hand laptop, it was insane. But it was also the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to leapfrog over the soul-crushing small jobs and get back on my feet in one fell swoop. It was a gamble of epic proportions. If I failed, I wouldn't just be back at square one. I'd be in an even deeper hole with a ruined reputation in the one town that was giving me a chance. I looked at Mr. Henderson's expectant face, the weight of his offer hanging in the air between us. Did I take the leap of faith? Have you ever had to take a wild gamble when you had nothing left to lose? Let me know in the comments. I said yes. The word left my mouth before my brain could fully process the terror of what I was agreeing to. The moment Mr. Henderson left, a check for the deposit in my hand, panic set in. But then, a different feeling pushed through. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated determination. I had been given one shot, and I wasn't going to miss. That night, I didn't sleep on the couch. I slept on the garage floor, on a pile of old blankets, my laptop next to me. The next 4 months were a blur. Caffeine and code, of color palettes and font pairings. It was a montage from a movie, only without the triumphant soundtrack, just the constant hum of my computer and the frantic clicking of my mouse. I worked 20-hour days. I ate cold pizza over my keyboard. I lost track of what day of the week it was. My world shrank to the 4 walls of that garage. Sarah became my unofficial business manager. She saw the manic gleam in my eye, and instead of telling me to slow down, she rolled up her sleeves. She'd come home from her 9-to-5 job and help me sort through invoices and contracts, creating spreadsheets on her own laptop while I wrestled with design mock-ups. She was the calm, logical force that kept my chaotic creativity from spiraling into total collapse. After the first month, I used a chunk of the deposit to hire a freelance coder, a kid fresh out of college named Leo, who was brilliant and hungry for experience. 2 weeks after that, I hired a part-time project manager, a woman who used to work at a big agency and was tired of the corporate grind. We worked out of the garage, 3 of us huddled around the folding table, fueled by Sarah's endless supply of coffee. We were a tiny, scrappy team, but we were a team. Slowly, painstakingly, we started to make progress. The new logo for Henderson's Hardware was approved on the first draft. The website design came together seamlessly. We hit every deadline, not just on time, but early. Mr. Henderson, a man not known for praise, would stop by occasionally, grunt with what I now recognized as approval, and leave. The day we launched the new branding was the day everything changed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news did a story on the hometown hardware slick new look. Other local business owners started calling. First it was a trickle, then a flood. A restaurant group, a local law firm, a boutique hotel. They all wanted what I had done for Henderson's. Within 6 months, I moved the business out of the garage and into a small, sunlit office space above a bookstore. It was smaller than my old place, but it felt 1,000 times bigger because I had built it from nothing, from the absolute ashes. A month after that, I moved out of Sarah's place into my own small apartment. The first night there, I didn't even unpack. I just lay on the floor in the empty living room and cried. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. 2 years passed. My new company, which I cheekily named Phoenix Designs, wasn't just successful, it was more successful than my old one had ever been. We had a team of 6, a waiting list of clients, and a reputation for being the best in the region. I had not only climbed out of the pit, I had built a skyscraper on top of it. Word travels fast in a small town. Through the grapevine of neighbors and old family friends, I started hearing whispers. Aunt Carol's husband's safe investments had turned out to be a scam, and they'd lost a significant chunk of their retirement savings. Cousin Mark, who'd been so proud of his responsible corporate job, had been laid off in a round of downsizing. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of irony. The tables weren't just turning, they were spinning. One Friday evening, I was at a local diner with Sarah, celebrating a huge new contract we just landed. We were laughing over a shared plate of onion rings, the familiar greasy spoon comfort of the place a welcome relief after a long week. The bell on the diner door jingled, announcing new arrivals. I glanced up casually, my eyes scanning the room. And then they locked with a pair of eyes I hadn't seen in over 2 years. In walked Aunt Carol and Cousin Mark. She was holding a menu, but her hand froze midway to her chest. Her jaw didn't just drop, it hit the linoleum floor. They stood there for a moment, paralyzed, as if they'd seen a ghost. The arrogant confidence was gone. Aunt Carol looked tired, her face etched with lines of worry I'd never seen before. Mark just looked defeated. He had a slouch to his shoulders that spoke of failure. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl, I just held her gaze, my expression perfectly neutral, and took a slow sip of my water. Sarah, sensing the tension, put her hand on my arm. "You want to leave?" she whispered. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want to finish my onion rings." They approached our table like they were walking on eggshells. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost fearful shuffle. Aunt Carol forced a smile, a brittle, cracking thing that didn't come close to her eyes. "Well, look who it is," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "We were just talking about you the other day, saying how we always knew you had it in you." Mark mumbled a hello, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. The air was thick with unspoken history, with the ghost of that horrible afternoon in her living room. They made awkward small talk about the weather, about the diner's new pie special, anything to fill the suffocating silence. I let them. I gave them one-word answers, offering nothing, my face a placid mask. Sarah just watched, her expression unreadable, but her presence a solid wall at my back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of painful pleasantries, they got to the point, the real reason they'd crossed the room. "Look," Aunt Carol started, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, wringing her hands together. "Things have been tough lately. With the market and Mark's job, it's been a perfect storm." The irony of her using my own words was so thick I could have choked on it. "The long and short of it is," she continued, finally looking me in the eye, her gaze pleading, "we're in a bit of a bind. The bank is threatening foreclosure on our house." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "We were hoping, seeing as you're doing so well for yourself now, that you might be able to help us out with a small family loan just to get us back on our feet." This was it. The moment I had unconsciously played over in my head 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, in the darkest hours of the night. The moment of reckoning. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant joy. I didn't feel a surge of vengeful anger. I just felt a profound, bone-deep stillness. I let them lay it all out, their excuses, their fake apologies for being a little harsh back then, their rosy picture of how we could all be a happy family again. I listened patiently, nodding slightly, letting the silence hang heavy and suffocating in the air after they were finally done pleading their case. Aunt Carol, seeing my silence as a possible opening, reached across the table, her hand cold and desperate as it grabbed mine. Actual tears, real or fabricated, I couldn't tell, welled in her eyes. "We're blood," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have to help us, please." I let her hold my hand for a second longer, letting her feel the warmth and strength in it. Then I slowly, deliberately pulled my hand away. I leaned forward, just a fraction, making sure I had her full, undivided attention. I looked her right in the eye, and I gave her my answer. "I remember," I said, my voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it cut through the diner's ambient noise like a razor. "I remember you telling me that beggars can't be choosers." I reached into my purse, pulled out my wallet, and took out a single $20 bill. I laid it flat on the table and slid it across the smooth Formica surface until it stopped right in front of her. "This is for your lunch," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. But as for a loan, the bank of my goodwill went out of business a long time ago. It's permanently closed. Aunt Carol stared at the $20 bill as if it were a venomous snake. Mark's face went pale, then flushed a deep, mottled red. The mask of desperation fell from my aunt's face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. But she didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. I stood up, dropping a few more bills on the table to cover our check. Sarah stood with me. I didn't look at them again. I didn't need to see their faces to know the impact of my words. I turned my back on them, on the past, on the entire toxic chapter of my life they represented, and walked out of the diner with Sarah by my side. The bell on the door jingled my exit, a sound of finality, of freedom. Walking out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. It didn't feel like revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was cold, clean, and quiet. It was about self-respect. It was about honoring the woman who survived sleeping in her car, who rebuilt her life from scratch in a dusty garage. It was about drawing a line in the sand and refusing to let the people who pushed me into the abyss try to use me as their ladder to climb back out. My story isn't about getting even. It's about understanding the real meaning of family. Family isn't an obligation defined by blood. It's not about showing up for the good times and the Sunday dinners. It's about who shows up with a couch and a hot meal when you have nothing left. It's about who answers the phone when you're at your lowest, who believes in you when you've stopped believing in yourself. I lost the family I was born with, but in the process, I found my real one. It was smaller, quieter, but it was built on a foundation of loyalty and love, not convenience and greed. And that is a comeback worth more than any amount of money in the world. So now I want to turn it over to you. Was I too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I really want to know what you all think.